Hello and welcome back with Kim Reads as we continue with Addy Saves the Day. Chapter 2, Hope and Determination. Saturday morning dawned bright and blue. Addy felt hopeful as she walked along between Mom and Papa. They were all dressed up in their Sunday best in honor of the Grand Review. Before they went to the parade, they were going to the Quaker meeting hall to deliver their letter. Outside the meeting hall, Papa took off his hat and checked to be sure the letter was safe in his coat pocket. They went inside and walked to a small room in the back of the hall where the Quaker Aid meeting had its office. "Good morning," a pleasant voice called them. It was Mr. Cooper, had helped them on other visits, his face beaming a smile. Addy smiled back at him. She liked Mr. Cooper. He was a little man with thick, curly blonde hair and a kind manner. "It's good to see you again," Mr. Cooper said. "How are you?" "We are just fine," answered Mama. "We are hoping for some good news about our family." "Did anyone answer our last letter?" Addy asked brightly. "I'm afraid not," Mr. Cooper said, "but these things take time, you know." "We've been finding that out," Papa said. "This waiting and not knowing has been trying my patience." Mr. Cooper looked sorry. "It breaks my heart knowing so many families are divided," he said. "I wish we could do more to help. Just this week, 30 people have come in looking to help find their families. I know some of them will never be reunited." Mr. Cooper shook his head. "Yesterday, a young man stopped by who has been coming here for months trying to find his mother. Just the day before, I'd gotten word that his mother passed away, and I had to tell him that." Addy felt her throat tighten. She didn't want to think about her family getting bad news as bad as that. She was glad to hear Papa say in a sure voice, "I'll tell you what, Mr. Cooper, my family can't give up hoping. Hope is all we got." "Hope and determination," said Mr. Cooper. He took the letter from Papa and smiled at Addy. "That's two good things you got working for you, Mr. Walker." From the Quaker meeting hall, it was a short walk to the parade route. Addy and her parents joined thousands of people lining the street under banners that swooped from building to building. Addy had never seen such a huge flags or so much red, white, and blue bunting. It seemed to her that there were more people in the streets now than there had been in night the war ended. The sidewalks were so crowded that some boys had climbed to the top of light poles to get a good view of the parade. The pounding of clashing cymbals, booming drums, and brassy horns burst through the air. Addy liked the way the music sounded, so strong and proud. Though she could hear the music, she couldn't see the musicians or the marching soldiers. She stood on tiptoe, trying to see over the people, but the crowd formed a wall taller than she was. "I can't see nothing, Papa," she complained. "I can fix that," said Papa. He lifted Addy and sat her on his shoulders. "What about now?" Papa asked. "I can see everything," Addy exclaimed. "This is the best seat." A band was just passing by. The musicians wore blue uniforms with gleaming brass buttons. Now Addy could see the soldiers too. Hundreds and hundreds of them marching in straight lines. Some of them soldiers rode horses. Addy smiled to see that even the horses looked special for the occasion. They pranced past with their manes braided and their thick tails well brushed. As far as Addy could see, the blue of the soldiers' uniforms filled the street. The soldiers carried rifles, and many had shining swords hanging from their belts. Addy looked at their faces. She was surprised to see how young some of them were. They looked younger than Sam. A red-haired woman stood next to Mama and Papa, waving a small flag. She turned to them and said, "Look, there's my son. That's Jimmy. He's the one with the red hair in the front row." "He's a fine-looking boy," Mama replied. "You must be very proud of your son," Papa asked. The woman wiped tears from her face as her son marched past. "I'm so glad Jimmy made it home," she said. "My other son was killed at a battle in Virginia. Do you know what it's like to have your child die in a place you've never seen, and you've never had a chance to say goodbye?" "We can understand your feelings," Papa said kindly. "There ain't no greater pain than losing a child." The woman's story made Addy think of Sam. He wanted so badly to be a soldier. Had he become one? Would he ever come marching home, proud and tall like these soldiers? As Eddie watched the blue of sea of troops flowing down the street, she felt tears fill her eyes. If Sam had managed to escape from slavery and become a soldier, he could be dead and they wouldn't even know it. She felt another stab of envy for Harriet. Addy tried to pull the worried and jealous thoughts out of her mind, but they looked like stubborn weeds that refused to be uprooted. The next morning, Addy sat between Mama and her friend Sarah in the women's section of Trinity AME Church. Sunlight poured through the tall arch windows, filling the church with golden beams of light. She couldn't wait for Reverend Drake to finish his sermon. After church, she and her parents were going to go work in the garden. Addy squirmed with impatience. Mama put her arm around Addy and whispered, "Be still now, honey." Addy stopped squirming. She settled back in the pew close to Sarah and gazed at the beautiful rays of light while Reverend Drake spoke. When he finished the sermon, Addy thought it was time to leave, but then Reverend Drake started to make an announcement. "I know for many of you, the war isn't over yet," Reverend Drake began. "Many of you still aren't at peace, and how could you be? The country was torn apart by the Civil War just after finally it ended. President Lincoln was killed. He gave his life trying to make the country one again, North and South. The war has torn your families apart. Many families are scattered. Your children lost. Your fathers and sons, uncles and brothers still not home with you. Many of you began every day with a prayer to see your loved ones again, and end the day with that same prayer." Addy sat up straight and listened hard. It seemed as if Reverend Drake was speaking directly to her. "Some of you pray for healing, and maybe you have a loved one who was wounded in the war or is sick in the hospital fighting for his life. You pray as hard as you can. God hears your prayers. He knows what hopes you have in your heart. You know He answers prayers." "Amen," Addy heard several voices come out. "That's right," Reverend Drake went on, "and you know that God helps those who help themselves. That's why I'm asking for your help this morning." Addy leaned forward to hear what Reverend Drake had to say. "Our church is going to be putting on the fair the second Saturday in July. We're going to work hard, all of us, to raise money. The money will help hospitals crowded with men who were wounded in the war. It'll help families who were separated find each other again. The money will help organizations that are taking care of the widows and orphans left alone by the war. Members of other churches will join us putting on the fair so we can earn money for these important causes. Now I am asking each and every one of you to join the fundraising effort and work hard. Come to a meeting here at the church next Thursday to make plans. Will you be here?" "Amen, Reverend," shouted other people. Addy squeezed Mama's hand and looked in her face. Mama smiled back, and Addy knew she and Mama were thinking the same thing. The fair could help families just like theirs. It would work hard to make it a success. When Thursday came, Addy, Mom, and Papa were among the first to arrive at church for the meeting about the fair. The grown-ups were meeting on the first floor. When Addy went downstairs to the Sabbath school room for the children's meeting, Sarah was already there. "Hey, Addy," Sarah called. "I saved you a seat." Addy and Sarah talked while they were waiting the other children to a group. When the church from the First Baptist Church came in, Addy couldn't believe her eyes. Harriet was leading the way. "Look who's here," Sarah said. "Oh no." Addy said she slumped down on her bench. Working with her is going to be as much fun as having a toothache. Mrs. Drake was the leader of the group. She offered all the children molasses cookies and iced tea. Addy and Sarah sat next to each other, munching on their cookies. Addy looked over at Harriet, but Harriet acted like she didn't know her. "Children," said Mrs. Drake, calling the meeting to order, "we are here to decide on a project you can do to raise money at the fair. Now I think—" Harriet interrupted in a loud voice. "I know what to do." Sarah nudged Addy. "Here we go," she whispered. "Bossy Harriet." Mrs. Drake finished her sentence. "Now I think it will work best for you if you raise your hand before you speak," she said with a glance at Harriet. Harriet slowly raised her hand, but a boy from First Baptist shot his arm in the air, and Mrs. Drake called him in first. The boy said, "We could have a pie eating contest. Our church had one for the fall festival. It was fun." "But messy," said another boy. "Why don't we sell toy boats instead?" Harriet raised her hand high. And Mrs. Drake called on her. Those ideas are not as good as mine. Harriet said, I think we should present a magic show. I will be the magician. I can pull rabbits out of hats and make things disappear. I wish she would disappear, Sarah whispered to Addie. Addie hid a giggle behind her hand. She thought hard while Harriet talked about the magic show, telling the group how much they should charge for tickets, how many tickets they sell, and how much money they would make. Well, Harriet, interrupted Miss Drake, thank you. You certainly are fast adding up figures. But does anyone else have suggestions for a project? Addie raised her hand and spoke. We could make spool puppets, she said. My papa showed me how to make them. They're really easy. And I get free spools from the dress shop where my mama works. Sounds good, said Sarah. I think so too, said the boy who had suggested the pie eating contest. All the other children liked Addie's idea too, except Harriet. Puppets? How boring, she said. A magic show would be much better and much more fun. Spool puppets is a lot of fun, said Addie. You can make them move and dance around. Suddenly, Addie had an inspiration. I know, maybe my papa could even build a little stage. And we could put on a puppet show at the fair. We could tell jokes and riddles, and everybody could see how much fun puppet is and buy them. I think that's a splendid idea, said Mrs. Drake. How many of you agree? Everyone's hand went up, except Harriet's. Well then, said Mrs. Drake, I think we've decided. We'll make spool puppets and put on a show with them. Let's make it here a week from today to start making our puppets. The children agreed and stood up to leave. Addie caught Harriet's eye and smiled smugly. Harriet made a face, but Addie didn't care. Her idea won over Harriet's. On the way home from the meeting, Addie held Mama's hand and listened while Mama and Papa talked about the projects the grown-ups were going to do for the fair. The women had a real nice meeting, said Mama. We can bake pies to sell and make quilts to raffle. I said I'd bring some seedlings from the garden. All the women thought they'd sell well. That sounds good, said Papa. The man's going to build all the booths at the fair. Deacon Martin got a peanut wagon, and he said he'll supply free roasted peanuts for us to sell. I said I'd make slide whistles for you and the kids to sell. Papa turned to Addie. What's your group doing, honey? He said, since we left the church, you've been bubbling over like a pot of hot milk. I know you got something you want to tell. Addie smiled. We had the best meeting. We're making spool puppets. She turned to Mama. Can you help with empty spools from the shop? I sure can, answered Mama. Good, said Addie. And Papa, could you please build a puppet stage? We want to put on a puppet show so that puppets won't move. I can do that. Thank you, said Addie. The puppets and the show were my idea. Everybody except that snotty Harriet liked my idea. She was so jealous my idea beat hers. When she hear you're going to be making the slide whistles too, Papa, she's going to have another fit. Mom and Papa were quiet, and then Papa said, you disappointed me with that boastful pride, Addie. You know the fairy in a contest. Addie felt a warm flush of shame spread over her face. Mama said, I know you and Harriet hit it off like a dog and a cat, but you're working together now, and this is your chance to make peace with each other. I'm sorry I said what I did, Addie replied. I'm going to try hard to get along with Harriet, I promise. Mama squeezed Addie's hand. That's all we askin', Mama said. The night after Addie got ready for bed, Papa said, come here, Addie. Me and my mama need to talk to you about something. Addie didn't like the tone of Papa's voice. It sounded as if he might have some bad news to tell. He and Mama were sitting at the table. The lamp was lit, casting huge shadows over the room. Addie went over them and asked in a worried voice, what's wrong? Nothing, Papa said. It's just that me and your Mama changed our plans for me to go back to the plantation to get Esther. I don't have to wait until we sell our vegetable. Reverend Drake said the church gonna give me part of the money earned at the fair to help me on my trip. So I'm gonna go in 3 weeks, right after the fair. Addie threw her arms around Papa, almost kicking him off his chair. She kissed him on the cheek. Oh, Papa, Papa, she exclaimed. It's the best news I've ever heard. She sat down in his lap. Mama said, you know your Papa's been anxious to go. We figured now that we have the garden planted, you and I can take care of it and harvest the vegetables and sell them. We'll need money while Papa's away and not working, and Papa's boss say he'll hold Papa's job for him while he's gone. Well, he ain't exactly promised me my job back, Papa said. He said if he got work, when I get back, he'll take me on again. If not, I'm back where I started, looking for a carpenter job. Well, some bosses wouldn't even do that much, Mama said. Addy was excited by the idea of Papa going West, but worries for their mind. Wasn't it dangerous for Papa to go back to the plantation? When Master Stevens owned them, he could do whatever he wanted with them. Wouldn't Master Stevens be angry at Papa because she and Mama ran away? Addy hugged Papa closer. Ain't you scared to go back, Papa? She asked. Ain't you scared of Master Stevens? He ain't our master no more, Papa said, and I ain't scared of him. Well, I'm sure he got guns and whips and them mean dogs too, Addy said, shivering. Papa drew back so Addy could see his face. Listen to me, he said. Slavery is over, and ain't no one gonna stop me from getting my family. Addy looked deep into Papa's dark eyes. They looked calm and peaceful. Is there anything I can do to help, Papa? I'll do anything to help. Keep on working in the garden, Papa said. Don't let the weeds grow back, and something else too. He held Addy close in his arms. Try not to trouble your heart with worry. Come on now, Addy said. Come now, Addy, Mama said. You need to get ready for bed. Addy gave Mama and Papa goodnight kisses. They stayed at the table, talking quietly, as Addy said her prayers quickly, drove to bed, and snuggled under her quilt. She held her doll, Ida being close to her. Slowly, 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 the gentle, peaceful sound of their voices carried her off to sleep. And that is the end of that chapter. I will see you later.